Hello, my friends. Welcome to Keswick Chapel with you. I'm Pastor Robert. This is day 2 of week 48. Today we're looking at justice requires prayer. In the first part of our passage from Luke 18, verses 1 through 14 this week, we see that God hears our plea, and then Jesus asks a great question at the end of this passage. He wonders, will the Son of Man find such persistent faith when he returns? Of course, we're talking about the persistence of the woman who wanted justice from the judge. It's a very important thing to understand. Jesus not only expects us to be persistent in our prayers, he expects them to be grounded in faith. In the second part of the parable, we see this comparison between a Pharisee and a tax collector. The Pharisee stands off and he declares himself righteous before God, thanking God that he's not like a robber or a liar or a cheat or any one of a number of things. He is declaring his self-righteousness before God. And then on the other side, the contrast is this tax collector who won't even lift his eyes to heaven, but instead beats his chest and confesses to God that he is a sinner, unworthy of God's love. And yet Jesus says that this man, the tax collector, after his prayers went home justified because he was humble and honest. Furthermore, Jesus says that he will be exalted. What are we supposed to do? What do we take from this passage? Well, I believe that we take persistent prayer with a humble heart, based and grounded in faith. This is what Jesus is looking for, and the kind of faith that Jesus talks about requires prayer. We must pray. We must pray with a humble heart. We must seek to ask God who we are, not tell him who we believe we are, who we think we are. In Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 through 28, we read this story of a Canaanite woman who came to Jesus because her daughter was demon-possessed. She came to Jesus asking him to heal her daughter. And Jesus says, well, I didn't come here for you. And she says, yes, I understand. But even the dogs get to eat the master's scraps that fall to the floor. Jesus was blown away by her faith and her persistence. Understand, this dialogue with Jesus is really no different than our prayer. She came to Jesus, she made her request known, and she persisted. And she was humble. And so Jesus granted her request. Justice and prayer are tied together, and they're required. We're also required to pray for our enemies. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, Jesus says, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And this is a hard teaching, and yet Jesus is very clear. There's no wiggle room here. This is what we're supposed to do. Some might say, well, you have no idea what so-and-so and such did to me or said about me. And you're right, I don't have a clue. But Jesus knows. And yet Jesus still persists in telling us that we are to pray for our enemies. Look at Luke chapter 6, verse 28. We're also to forgive, and many times forgiveness needs to begin with the person that we're looking at in the mirror. Maybe we've done things and we need to ask for forgiveness. Perhaps we've asked for forgiveness and God's forgiven us, and yet we haven't forgiven ourselves. We need to ask God to help us with that, to teach us how to forgive ourselves, how to let go of the past, and to move forward in the direction that He's calling us to. Well, going back to that situation where someone's done you wrong or done me wrong, we're to forgive them too, and we're to pray for them. Here's the thing, we can't pray for them if we're mad. We can't pray for them if we're holding on to an injustice. We have to pray for them because Jesus tells us to pray for them. And so if we're harboring ill feelings or anger, we're not going to be able to pray for them. We certainly will be able to pray for them with a humble heart or with any persistence. And they're required in order for us to see God's justice at work. Not our own, but His. We're to leave justice to God. In Romans chapter 12, verses 16 through 21, Paul tells us to be at peace with everyone as much as is possible for us, or as much as it depends on me. I'm to live in peace with everyone. Sometimes it's hard. People don't want to live in peace with us. Maybe God wants us to pray for them, to pray for the best things in their lives, and to do so persistently. This is hard work, and yet this is what's required. We cannot pray humble prayers of faith if we harbor anger or ill will towards other people. And yet we know this to be true. Jesus does require prayer. We have to ask ourselves, which way are we choosing? Are we choosing the way of Jesus, or are we choosing our own way? The way of Christ leads to life everlasting and peace, and it requires prayer. I pray that as you look at these verses that I've mentioned here today, that you'll ask God to give you eyes to see and ears to hear His truth from His Word. That you'll ask for a receptive heart and mind to receive these truths, and then have the boldness and the courage of Jesus Christ Himself to take the actions that you need to take. I pray you'll have a wonderful day, my friends. Go in the peace of God. Blessings to you. Bye for now.